The Executive Director here at Henry Street Settlement. We welcome you to the Lower East Side. We welcome you to Henry Street Settlement. We welcome you to our Abrons Arts Center. Yeah, definitely applause worthy. For 126 years and counting, Henry Street Settlement has been at the forefront of progressive reform in so many ways. We helped establish the field of public health. We helped put the first nurse in New York City public schools. We helped establish the first playground in New York City. We helped establish the visiting nurse service. We were one of the first to create a family shelter. We were an instrumental part and supporting of the New Deal when it was new. And we've always been at that forefront of progressive reform in many ways. Today, we are a comprehensive social service agency that from this spot, within a mile, we have 18 sites that delivers a constellation of services from early childhood education to after-school programs to college success, to health care, to shelter and transitional housing, to food stamps, to Meals on Wheels, to health insurance access, to legal services, to eviction prevention, and this whole constellation of services that we provide for all ages of anyone in the community and all New Yorkers. When we were established, there were no subways. Communities were somewhat insulated and isolated, but today we serve individuals from all across the 5 boroughs, and yes, including Staten Island. So we are thrilled to be here tonight, hosting all of you to talk about the Green New Deal, and once again to be somehow connected to and participating and supporting progressive reform. We are thrilled with the passage of the Climate and Community Protection Act. We know, yes, we know it is just the beginning, and we stand committed to really do anything that's going to preserve, protect, and advance the health and safety of our communities. So we extend that commitment to fighting climate change and/or the impacts that it's already having on the people that live in this community and so many others. So we're really honored and grateful to be hosting all of you tonight, and we welcome you with open arms, open hearts, and open minds. This is an extraordinarily important conversation, and without further ado, I bring you Jackie O.
David, for that nice introduction. My last name does begin with O. It happens to be Ottman, and I'm proud to be the chair of the Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board and sponsoring this event tonight. We're thrilled to be in this space. We're deeply respectful for all that the Henry Street Settlement has done for 126 years. And we love the mission of this art center, which is to mobilize communities through the transformative power of art. How's that? And we love the fact that this center runs zero waste events. There are no printed programs given out when you come to an event here, which is great. So to everyone in the audience, welcome. Many of you are already familiar with the Manhattan MSWAB, and we're thrilled to see so many new faces. Welcome everyone to our growing family of partners, friends, and supporters of New York City's zero waste goals. I have a confession to make. On January 3rd, my vice chair and I went down to the Manhattan Borough President's office to see if they had any insights or expectations for us this year. When we were told that Gail was very interested in starting to educate New Yorkers about the Green New Deal, my immediate reaction was, Green New what? A little over 6 months later, the Green New Deal is a very big deal. It's spawning policy initiatives like the Mayor's One NYC plan, the recently passed Climate Mobilization Act, and the Climate Leadership Act that David just mentioned. Not to mention all the resolutions and conversations going on in Washington and all across the country. Tonight, we're going to do a deep dive into the implications of this Green New Deal for solid waste and consumption culture. 2 things that we on the Manhattan MSWAB very much need to be made part of those conversations. Now, before segueing into a short presentation and panel led by 2 members of our board, I just want to take a moment to introduce the Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board, or Manhattan MSWAB for short, to those of you who may be learning about us for the first time. The Manhattan MSWAB, believe it or not, has been working quietly behind the scenes for 40 years. We're a board of 32 citizen volunteers, all appointed by the Manhattan Borough President's office. We were created in 1989 by Local Law 19 that made residential recycling mandatory in the city. How many people were around 1989 when that law passed? Okay. What do? We make an impact by catalyzing conversations, by giving public testimony, and by conducting outreach events like this one. We help to invest in local capacity building for zero waste, and we provide information and thought leadership on various topics. As examples, we're proud to have voiced our support for such recent groundbreaking legislation as the local ban on styrofoam, the statewide ban on plastic grocery bags, and the new New York State take-back law for unused pharmaceutical drugs. It gets better. Since 2001, we have partnered with the Citizens Committee for New York City to distribute grants to community gardens and local waste reduction projects. Are you sitting down? Since 2011, we have jointly given away $204,584 to 225 organizations in all 5 boroughs. We're proud. Some of our recent grantees are listed up on the loop, and more grantees are going to be announced this fall. In making these grants, we're facilitated by our fiscal sponsor, the Open Space Institute. Tonight is our first of 2 curated conversations we're going to be hosting this year. In October, we plan to host an event on recycling, organics collection, and reuse, and what it takes to engender citizen participation. We'll wrap up in November with another one of our big fundraisers. We hope all of you will be able to join us to support the grants and to start to make some new conversations among the crowd that can help you all make zero waste a reality for New York. We on the SWAB are grateful to other partners as well. The Durst organization hosts our monthly meetings, which you're all invited to, and we deeply appreciate the generosity of the many sponsors whose logos were up on this loop as well. And many of our sponsors are right here in the front row. They not only made this evening possible, but their contributions so far, just this year, will help us donate at least another $18,000 in grants. Thank you. Now, in a few seconds, 2 SWAB members are going to kick off the formal program. Before that happens, I'd like to recognize them and all of the SWAB members and other individuals behind the scenes who are responsible for this evening tonight. May I ask our fundraising chair, Matt Savillo, where's Matt, to stand along with the rest of the fundraising committee and all our volunteers, partners, and sponsors who are here this evening. Please stand up and to accept our appreciation. Everybody, come on, everybody. Come on, guys. Everybody's camera shy. Okay, there we go. A lot of work, as you can imagine, went into this, and everybody's volunteers. So, without further ado, please welcome Ms. Tinia Pina, a member of our SWAB fundraising committee and a major force behind this event. Tinia is the founder and CEO of Renewable, a company based here in Manhattan that develops innovative technologies sourced from organics waste streams. She's going to give us all some background on why integrating solid waste into any discussion of the Green New Deal and climate change is so necessary. Thanks for your attention. Enjoy the panel. And here comes Tinia.
Good evening, and thank you for having me here today. As you can imagine, the nature of Renewable's work means that we are constantly exposed to New York City's current solid waste management systems. But the reality is that it's not just companies like Renewable or organizations like Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board that are exposed to it, but all of us in some way or another, be it at a residential, commercial, or institutional scale. Today's Full House is a clear testament to this. I believe the Green New Deal, although it does not mention solid waste explicitly, is presenting us with a prime opportunity to determine ways to improve the system further. New York City has already done a great job developing progressive plans and legislation, making it one of the leading cities here in the U.S. in an effort to mitigate the various climate change challenges. A great example from One NYC, the city's official strategic plan. Enhancing is the curbside recycling plan, where the plan is to offer single-stream recycling across the city by 2020. To help the city achieve this goal, the Department of Sanitation of New York locked down a 20-year contract with Sims Municipal Recycling, which handles material through a city-owned materials recovery facility in Brooklyn and a facility of its own in New Jersey. Then we have the Pratt Industries Mill on Staten Island, which gives more than half of the city's residential paper an automatic end market. This setup has helped insulate all parties from some of the effects of China's scrap import restrictions. Another commendable initiative is the city's plans to commercialize waste collection zones. The plan is to divide New York City into 20 zones, each served by 3 to 5 carters selected through a competitive process. New Yorkers will hopefully then enjoy a city with reduced truck traffic due to an over 60% decrease in commercial waste collection trucks on the road, better waste collection service standards, as well as an opportunity to leverage on their customer choice rights. Despite these efforts, we're missing out on a huge opportunity to create a larger impact by not including strategies addressing the interconnectivity, and I really want to emphasize interconnectivity, of reduction, recovery, and recycling of solid waste and its inherent emissions. To do this, understanding the range of solid waste management technologies that have hit the market is key. A technology that has received a lot of attention is anaerobic digesters. Not only is the byproduct of these digesters, which are renewable energy and fertilizers, both renewable resources, but the input for these machines, which are usually products from animals and humans, are produced continually. Anaerobic digesters are also known for removing phosphorus and other metals from the waste products, leading to higher quality water supply and reduced ancillary risk for leached nitrogen into our soils and watersheds. They also decrease pathogens in slurry, which may cause diseases to plants. The downside, however, are the high installation, operating, and maintenance expenses. This limits its economical feasibility to mostly larger farms. Adding to that, it also requires daily system operation and maintenance. On the opposite side of the scale, we have the example of composting, which is a highly accessible solid waste management technology for anyone and everyone. Its byproducts can be used for regenerative agriculture while also improving soil health, which can be also indirectly save our water and other natural resources. Unfortunately, composting also has its limitations. Only organic matter can be used as input. In addition, for many people who are just starting out and learning the composting ins and outs, they may face odor issues as well as the potential contamination of entire compost mixes if the wrong waste is added. Furthermore, developing a good compost soil nutrient can take work and time. Looking at just these two examples, you can see the wide range of benefits and challenges that they face. If we were to then break down the rest of the solid waste management technologies, such as dehydrators, pyrolysis, incinerators, dewaterers, and food waste liquefiers, for example, what opportunities and limitations would we see then? Perhaps this is where the Green New Deal can come in. One of its key components is major decarbonization across the nation. The Green New Deal's language touches upon the reduction of emissions from manufacturing, agriculture, and other industries, as well as decarbonizing, repairing, and improving transportation and other infrastructure. The Green New Deal makes reference to clean air, water, land, but if we skip over waste management, no matter how decarbonized we become, we will always have municipal solid waste. So the question I'd like to pose to everyone today is, through the Green New Deal, how can we better connect the solid waste management technologies that exist today so that they don't work in isolation, but in fact are closely connected to one another? For example, could we harness energy from a farm's anaerobic digester to supply energy to an energy-demanding dehydrator that is located at a food processing manufacturer nearby? If we were able to do this successfully, we can potentially lower solid waste that goes to landfills, thus reducing carbon emissions and achieving one of the key goals of the Green New Deal. In fact, by creating a more interconnected solid waste industry, the Green New Deal will be able to then achieve its next goal, improving justice and equality through job creation, with the potential vision for solutions that provide interconnectivity is the opportunity to discuss if local, decentralized solutions should be given more priority over solutions that can be scaled globally. If there is ever a better time to have this conversation, the time is now. The nation could then move even closer towards hitting some SDG goals, such as SDG 11.6.1, which outlines by 2030, reduce the adverse per capita environmental impact of cities, paying special attention to municipal and other solid waste management, or SDG 12.3. By 2020, halve per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels, and reduce food losses along production supply chains, including post-harvest losses. Now, before I end, I'll leave you with a rapid fire of statistics that I hope will motivate all of us to think about the type of innovation and funding needed to address the solid waste management infrastructure gaps. Looking at New York City, we're on the right track. The city saw a 70% decrease in greenhouse emissions from 2006 to 2015. In terms of sectors, as of 2015, buildings make up the bulk of New York City's greenhouse gas emissions, producing over 2 metric carbon dioxide, followed by transportation and wastewater treatment with just under 0.5 of that. As for solid waste, while it only produces 0.07 of metric tons of carbon dioxide, it is still a considerable amount for a mega city like ours. Therefore, leveraging on the idea of connecting solid waste management technologies, for example, increasing pyrolysis technologies across high-end restaurants, could we then reduce greenhouse gas emissions from other industries, such as the building sectors, which house these restaurants? Now, looking at municipal level data, there is definitely an increase in the number of solid waste being produced. The total generation of municipal solid waste in 2015 was 262 million tons, which is approximately 3.5 million tons more than the amount generated in 2014. On a per-person basis, the total solid waste generated in 2015 stood at 4.48 pounds per person per day. But once again, this provides us with an opportunity to increase the tonnage of waste that goes towards energy recovery technology. As of 2015, almost 150,000 tons of waste was sent to landfill compared to just over 30,000 tons which was sent for combustion with energy recovery. At a time when New York just announced its ambitious climate bill, amid a number of Democratic presidential candidates proposing net zero targets for the United States, setting the stage for one of the most ambitious climate targets by a legislature anywhere in the world, the city will need to get 70% of its electricity from renewable resources by 2030. We need to think about every avenue possible to reach this, and solid waste management as one of the key expenses of a city is no doubt a promising way forward. In conclusion, I leave you with this question. With all of the solid waste management technologies that we have, what can we build into the Green New Deal in order to create a more holistic system, as well as a platform to innovate and improve our infrastructure, ensuring that it benefits all? Thank you. So I'd like to introduce our other phenomenal Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board member, Kate Mikuliak. Not yet. Kate Mikuliak is a passionate and accomplished public policy maker, advocate, and stakeholder engagement expert with over 14 years of New York City government experience. She currently serves as a program manager for strategic policy at the New York City Department of Transportation, where she oversees the delivery of the agency's 2016 strategic plan and develops policies and programs related to the New York City Department of Transportation's 80 by 50 and 1 NYC commitments. Previously, Kate worked for New York City Department of Transportation in an intergovernmental affairs capacity, playing a crucial role in passing over 50 state and local levels, including legislation to lower New York City's citywide speed limit to 25 miles per hour. In her personal time, Kate is a member of Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board, for which she served as a chair of the Legislative Committee from 2017 to 2019. She holds a Master of Public Administration from the New York University Wagner School of Public Service and lives in Brooklyn. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. I'd also like to invite the panelists up to join me. And while they make their way to the stage, I want to say good evening, everyone. My name is Kate Mikuliak, and as Tunia said, I am a member of the Manhattan MSWAB. I'm going to be moderating tonight's panel, as you know, and I'm going to start by introducing the panelists. Then we'll have about 40 minutes of discussion among the panelists and myself. Then we'll open up to audience Q&A for about 30 minutes. So I'd like to ask that you hold your questions and comments until then. And my aim for tonight is not just to entertain and educate you guys about the Green New Deal and waste management, but also my goal is to empower and inspire you all to become active in the political process that's going to be necessary to actually implement the policies to achieve the goals that we're talking about tonight. So before we get to know our panelists, I'd like for us to take a moment to get to know all of you. So by a show of hands, who here in the audience lives in Manhattan? Okay, and how many of you live outside of Manhattan? All right, so it's about 50-50. Who here, before tonight's event, had heard of the Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board? Okay, people on the Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board, put your hands down. Okay, so before tonight's event and Tania's remarks, who here had heard of a circular economy, the concept? All right, what about commercial waste zones? Okay, and the Green New Deal? Great, okay. What about the Newtown Creek wastewater treatment plant? Has anyone been to visit? Great, so we have a really great discussion tonight. These are some of the topics we're going to be covering. And without further ado, let me introduce tonight's panelists. Ron Gonan is the co-founder and CEO of Closed Loops Partners, an investment firm focused on the development of the circular economy via investments in sustainable consumer goods and packaging companies, innovative recycling technologies, and advanced supply chains. Prior to Closed Loop Partners, Ron was the Deputy Commissioner of Sanitation, Recycling, and Sustainability in New York City, as well as the co-founder and CEO of Recycle Bank. Ron received an MBA from Columbia Business School and has been an adjunct professor at his alma mater since 2010. Join me in welcoming Ron. Robert Hockett is a professor of law at Cornell Law School, where his professional interests lie in the legal and institutional prerequisites to a just, prosperous, and sustainable economic order. Professor Hockett is also a fellow of the Century Foundation, an author for the New America Foundation, and regularly consults for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the International Monetary Fund, Americans for Financial Reform, the Occupy Cooperative, and a number of legislators and local governments. And this latter work includes helping to draft the Green New Deal resolution and white paper as part of Representative Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal team. Welcome, Professor Hockett. Jennifer McDonnell is the Resource Recovery Program Manager for the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, where she leads efforts to increase the beneficial use of biosolids, realize GHG reductions, harness renewable energy sources, and transform wastewater treatment to resource recovery. Previous to this, Jennifer worked at Whole Foods Northeast, where she led the adoption of commercial composting in over 40 stores. She also built her expertise in composting, land application, co-digestion, and product marketing while at Casella Organics. Jennifer is a certified recycling professional, a sustainable resource management professional, and a 2014 graduate of the Water Environment Federation's Water Leadership Institute. Welcome, Jennifer. Last but not least is Antonio Reynoso, the council member for the 34th District, representing parts of Bushwick, Ridgewood, and Williamsburg. Born and raised in the south side of Williamsburg, Antonio aims to improve quality of life within the district while advancing progressive, bold legislation citywide. As chair of the Sanitation Committee, Antonio has passed legislation to bring equity into our waste processing system and is working to enact a citywide commercial waste zoning system. Antonio is a leader in citywide efforts to address socioeconomic and racial disparities, improve our land use process, and increase use of transportation alternatives. Welcome, Antonio. And I am going to stay here. So my first question is for Professor Hockett. And that question is, as a member of Representative Ocasio-Cortez's policy team, I'd like you to tell us more about the regulations and incentives that could be used to implement the Green New Deal. Specifically, how might waste reduction, reuse, and recycling be included?
So first, thanks so much for letting me be part of this. This is a quite inspiring gathering. To the question directly, we're thinking in a way, the answer to the question at the moment is sort of wide open, and here's why. The way we're planning on developing the Green New Deal, and this is not only true of Representative Ocasio-Cortez, but all of the other senators and representatives who are part of it, and all of the many private citizens who are sort of taking part in constructing the Green New Deal, is we're envisaging a kind of a long-term, very democratic, very deliberative process pursuant to which the entire population of the country participates in the actual formation of the Green New Deal. That means, on the one hand, that while there's going to be a good bit of federal funding and federal involvement to coordinate efforts, the real impetus and the real projects that we develop and that we decide to pursue are going to be determined from the ground up, so to speak, on a local basis. And indeed, we're at the stage right now where we're planning a whole sequence of town hall events and other sort of smaller scale events like this one, with a view to getting the input of the entire general public of the United States in order to determine exactly what we ought to be pursuing and what we ought to be doing in every locality, right? One of the important analogies between the original New Deal and the Green New Deal is precisely the fact that, like the Green New Deal, like the original New Deal, we intend for the Green New Deal to have projects underway in literally every single congressional district of the country. That's partly a matter of making it just and making it democratic, and it's also probably good politics because then even Republicans like the idea. In any event, so what that means, I think, for your particular question is that to some extent the answer is sort of up to you or up to us, right? Up to all of us in the area. And we'll presumably and hopefully develop specific ideas and specific requests, even wish lists, going forward at venues like this one and at various town halls that we hope to hold with these questions specifically in mind. Now, so that's sort of by way of throat clearing and kind of broad sort of procedural situating. When it comes to more specifics, I certainly have a few thoughts of my own. I don't want to bore. Regulatory efforts are going to be an important part of the Green New Deal, but more important than that, we think, at least at the front end, is actual proactive action taken by city governments, by county governments, by state governments, and indeed also then by various sub-municipal institutions and organizations like this one. So we want primarily at the moment to focus more on what we can do affirmatively and what kind of funding we might need from the federal government or from other sources in order to do what we want to do first. And then insofar as regulatory changes or regulatory initiatives are needed as essential complements to those more affirmative sorts of actions, then of course we'll pursue those as well. I hope that's not too vague.
Well, it leaves a lot of room for development. And just a follow-up question is, if those in the audience tonight want to make sure that they're invited to those conversations, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so a number of things. First, we will, everybody, I encourage everybody to be in quite regular contact with city officials and with your particular representatives, right? If you're from New York 14th, of course be in touch with the representative herself. She's got an office sort of being opened up now in her district. All of our other Congress members from the various districts of the state of New York should also be being contacted by all of us. This is partly a matter of putting pressure on some of those who might be foot draggers or some of those who might be recalcitrant. And it's partly a matter of just making known, even to the non-reluctant and the non-recalcitrant, what it is we need and what it is that we want. So the first thing then, again, is to be in touch with those particular congressional officials. The second is to, I think, for all of us to start pushing our city government officials and other local officials to begin to hold and sponsor actual literal town hall events where we can actually start formulating at the community level specific wish lists. You can think of this as a kind of sort of an analog to the idea of participatory budgeting. But here what we would be talking about is not only participatory budgeting, but participatory planning, again at the local level. So in a way, it's partly up to all of us to make these events actually happen, to make the town hall events come to pass. That's partly a matter, I think, of brainstorming with our actual representatives at various levels of government, partly a matter of grassroots organizing and lobbying and protesting when need be, and partly a matter of, again, just reaching out to anybody who you might know to be involved in any sort of level of Green New Deal planning. I, for example, am always happy to receive messages or emails, and then I can share them with other colleagues. And the hope is that ultimately we're all sort of on the same level in planning this thing together, even though while we, at the start or at the front end, various people are in different posts or positions.
Thank you. I look forward to those discussions. Jennifer, I wanted to ask you, so in addition to the composting programs, like those that the Manhattan MSWAB supports with our funds from our grant program, which all of you have helped to raise funds for tonight, so thank you. So in addition to these composting programs, organic waste can also be diverted from landfill by turning it into energy through the processing at the Newtown Creek plant. Can you please give a brief overview of how this process works?
I'm lucky because Tania sort of already answered this question, but I'll add some to it. But first, I want to just stress the fact that such a large fraction of our municipal solid waste stream is organic. That it's very important that we focus on that when we talk about a zero waste strategy. That's something that I think New York's been pretty progressive about. But obviously, in order to extract that material and recover it, you need infrastructure, you need places to go, and you need technology that's going to make it into something usable. And that's really what Tini was talking about, whether it's composting infrastructure or anaerobic digestion infrastructure, which are two primary ways. Actually, a little lower, though, on the hierarchy, right, to recover food waste. First, you want to feed people and animals after you reduce the amount that you generate. But in any event, when talking about digestion, it's not actually a new technology. It's been around for a long time. It's quite proven and used very widely. In fact, believe it or not, the city has over 50 digesters already. They are digesting everything that you flush down the toilet and pour down the sink and some of the stuff that ends up in our storm drains. So that's the wastewater treatment infrastructure that exists within this city. We have 14, we're calling them now wastewater resource recovery facilities, because that's what we want them to be, to transform into. And we have digesters at every one of those. And we have more than one at every single one of them. Newtown Creek has the 8 giant eggs, which are very popular for photographers. You can find them, images of them everywhere. But that process of recovering organics is quite different than composting. They both are microbiological processes that use microorganisms to break down the organic matter into different things. In the case of digestion, that's done in the absence of oxygen, at least in the case of anaerobic digestion. And the methanogens are converting the carbon that's in our organic waste into methane, which is also natural gas. Simplifying that a little bit. But in essence, we have been working with waste management to take slurried food waste. Now, this is a very important distinction about digestion as the pathway for organic recovery. Material that is co-digested, particularly in a wastewater resource recovery facility, has to be liquefied before we can use it, before we can add it to the digester. So we're in a partnership with Waste Management that has a transfer station in Brooklyn where the solid food waste that's collected both by DSNY trucks in the residential brown bin program, as well as by the commercial haulers that we've talked a little bit about already as far as like the zoning work that's going on, delivered there, cleaned up, because unfortunately no matter really how much education you do. It's difficult to get very clean food waste in a large-scale collection program. So Waste Management cleans it up, turns it into something that's pumpable, brings it over to Newtown Creek. We mix it in with what is now called sludge at that point in the treatment process, put it in the digester, and make renewable energy with it. And then after it's been in the digester, it's in there for a pretty long time at Newtown Creek, about 35 to 40 days. Really long time. Then we take that liquid called digestate and in Newtown's case, put it on a boat, which you'll see these boats, they say DEP on them, sailing around Manhattan. And they're going from one treatment facility or from Newtown Creek to another that has dewatering equipment. And then we'll spin the water out of the solids, we'll make biosolids. Which unfortunately a large percentage of the city's biosolids are going to landfill right now, but that's what I spend most of my time trying to change. And I can probably talk too much about that. Thank you. Thanks for your support. And then the water gets put back into the water cycle. So that's digestion in an eggshell.
Thank you, Jennifer. I wanted to make a joke about eggshells in the Newtown Creek, but didn't. They're called. What are they? What are they called? The large domes.
We just call them the eggs.
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
Eggs. All right. All right, Councilmember Reynoso. I'd like you to talk about two of your bills. The waste equity legislation passed last year, and your bill being heard next week. Intro 1574 to establish commercial waste zones, which the Manhattan MSWAB will be testifying in support of. How are these bills pursuing the economic, social, and environmental justice efforts of the Green New Deal?
So first, I just want to say thank you for having me here, because I'm like the only non-expert on the panel. Everyone here is really smart. The first thing is the waste equity legislation. I was born in the south side of Williamsburg. What we handle in Williamsburg, we handle 40% of the city's trash, and it's about 40,000 tons of capacity, and of that, 20,000 is used. And it's a big issue when it comes to the environment, pollution, and just overall environmental injustice and racism. South Bronx is also a victim of it, and so is Southeast Queens. Between the three communities, mostly of color, we're talking about almost 70% of the city's trash being handled in those communities. What I wanted to do is, have every community handle its own trash and not put the entire burden on a few communities that have been, because of bad planning, have suffered for too long. The legislation called for a reduction in the capacity in these communities, and in doing so, of course, pushing it out into other communities. It's a very difficult piece of legislation to pass because while I care about my community and the South Bronx member cares about their community and the Southeast Queens member cares about their community, when it comes to equity, no one wants trash. They'll take parks, they'll take new libraries, new schools, but they don't want to take on new trash. But we all have to have the conversation and we all have to participate. So eventually the legislation passed after a lot of watering down to meet the needs of all these elected officials. But it got passed, and in my district, we were able to reduce the tonnage by, it says 50%, but it's closer to about 40%. And in Southeast Queens and in the Bronx, I think we reduced it by 33%. So we accomplished that goal. And now I want to say that's low-hanging fruit. That's the easy stuff. And it was the most impossible thing to pass in the city of New York. I think all my legislation passes by like 51%. I got 27 members to pass it. But it's the right thing to do. And I know long term, we're going to look back on this and say, what were we thinking? But I'm happy to do it. The second one is waste zoning legislation. We're trying to cut up the city. Well, they already explained it very well. But what is the most important part of it is through an RFP process, the city is allowed to choose carters that do good recycling, that take care of their workers, that are going to maximize the vehicles, minimize the vehicles miles traveled in these zones. And it allows us to insert ourselves. I had a conversation with some business owners who I told, look, if you self-regulate, we won't need to do this. And they said, well, we care about our bottom line. And I said, and I don't. So, but what it came, the conclusion is they won't do it. They don't care whether or not the carter that they're using is a green carter, takes care of its workers, has new trucks, and is trying to do everything they can to support the Green New Deal conversation. They don't care about that. They just want, the only Green New Deal they care about is the money. So we have to regulate. And I believe they left that room understanding why it needs to be regulated, and I was encouraged by that. But, when I hear Hockett speak about it being a people power movement, I believe in that wholeheartedly. My only concern is that it's trash and it's hard. It's hard to make it an attractive thing to sell to people. And what I don't want is that a very meaningful portion of what we need to get done, it related to the Green New Deal. I don't want it to be left to what's the hottest one, whether it's emissions from buildings or whether we're talking about vehicles and so forth. I don't want trash to be left out. So I do want to figure out a way that the conversation can be included into all these other types of I guess, emission reduction work that we need to get done. And I'm hoping that you can be helpful because obviously you're on the advisory team. So that's very important to me that, this is Manhattan. If we were talking about something else, we could triple the amount of people here. And trash is just difficult. So that's how I feel that we're contributing to the Green New Deal. And I'm hoping that a bigger picture, we get inserted some way more definitively. That's all right.
Thank you, council member. I agree. I want to make trash sexy.
Good luck.
So, Ron, I want to ask, how much excitement around the Green New Deal has there been among the companies you support? And can you describe any momentum to the work that Closed Loop partners as a result?
I can't really. I don't think. To Antonio's comment, unfortunately, I don't think that waste has been highlighted enough in the Green New Deal for them to really view it as part of the conversation, which makes it a little bit challenging to answer that question. I think when Antonio's bringing that up, I should really say Councilmember Reynoso. Well, I think the point that Councilmember Reynoso is bringing up is actually really critical, because we do need to make sure that waste and recycling is central to the Green New Deal, because then we will get a reaction from some of those larger companies about, are they supportive or are they not supportive? One thing I can tell you about most of the large consumer goods companies and retailers, they're becoming very focused on circular economy. And it's for different reasons. Sometimes it's for regulatory reasons, that they realize that if they don't do it, they're going to be forced to do it, and they'd rather get out in front of it. Sometimes they're doing it because they recognize that it is actually in the best interest of their bottom line, that if you have good recycling infrastructure like what Pratt has here in New York City, you can manufacture for less money. Or with anaerobic digestion, you can turn food waste that you used to pay to have carted away into gas that you can use in your store. And so I think if you bring it down to circular economy topics, most of those companies are starting to realize that there's huge economic opportunity in that type of system. But I think the council member makes a really good point about we have to get that the concept of circular economy to become central to the Green New Deal.
Just to throw in a quick addendum. So another, as you guys know, another really important sort of part of the vision of the Green New Deal is justice, right? We were viewing this as an opportunity to kind of get it right this time when it comes to generating income and distributing economic opportunity. And a huge part of that, in our view, is specifically to undo the tremendous damage that's been done to what we might think of as environmental justice over the decades, right? As Antonio noted, and as a lot of you guys doubtless have read in one form or another, I mean, there's just been this just ugly, very sordid history in this country of just dumping all forms of waste and directing all forms of unwanted emissions toward disadvantaged communities, or communities that have been traditionally marginalized or excluded, or communities that have been traditionally deprived of opportunities to earn good incomes and become wealthy enough to have influence with the many Congress members who oftentimes only listen to money. And this is right at the core. We view the justice piece of the Green New Deal not simply as a bug, but as a feature, as a sort of a very constitutive feature of the Green New Deal itself. We want to get that right. And for that reason, I think that what we're talking about this evening and what Antonio in particular emphasized, nothing could be more important to the Green New Deal itself if it's going to live up to its own name than that. One last point relatedly is, when we talk about emissions in connection with the Green New Deal, we do intend to use the term fairly broadly and not just to be talking about carbon dioxide emissions out of smokestacks or what have you, but all forms of emission, including solid waste emission. And if any Green New Dealers seem to be departing from that message or seem to be losing sight of it, please, stick them with a pitchfork, including me if I were ever to forget, God forbid. It's very much at the core of the mission. We really want it to be that way. And hopefully we'll be talking more about that too.
Ron, yeah.
So, I think I have tremendous admiration for the effort behind the Green New Deal. I think one of the challenges is that it's becomes hyper politicized, which is why communication around the Green New Deal is so critical to make sure that it can't be politicized and the message altered. But one quick story I wanted to tell, and one thing I think we could have done a better job of in the Bloomberg administration was we did the transfer station on the Upper East Side, right, because of borough equity. And when that was being built, we were constantly getting sued by residents of the Upper East Side, right? Because all of a sudden they were going to have to be responsible for their own trash. And when we would face that opposition, our general response was like, "It's going to happen." So like, we're happy to have the meeting, but like, it's happening. Like, thank you very much. And what I realized towards the end, and in retrospect, was a better response would have been, "We're happy to get rid of that transfer station. If you no longer are producing the waste required for that transfer station,
Yes.
we can use it for some other feature. The transfer station is just a result of your own behavior. If you're willing to change your behavior, we're happy to get rid of the transfer station." And I think that type of optionality actually needs to be provided to every community based on the council members' work of getting that message out there that you will be responsible for your own trash. I think that's step one.
Or sewage.
Or sewage, right? Step two is for the city to say, however, we're going to provide you the city services, curbside recycling, organics, textiles, e-waste, strategies on how to reduce your consumption that'll make it such that we may not even need that transfer station in your neighborhood. But the choice is yours. And so, although we were successful in getting that transfer station built on the Upper East Side, and it's a really important thing for the city, I wish we would have been more strategic in the messaging to explain to people the optionality.
Well, now that Councilmember Kalos is one of big supporters of the zero waste movement, and so he is continuing that messaging, and he has some legislation in the City Council for codifying the city's zero waste goals. So he's providing that message. So Councilmember Reynoso?
Yes. I'm saying the Upper East Side transfer station is like the Taj Mahal of transfer stations, by the way. You won't know it's there because it doesn't smell like anything. It's just amazing. And if we ever need to repurpose it, trust me, it'll be an easy thing to do because it looks amazing in there. And you're allowed to go on tour whenever you want. So if you ever want to go by East 91st Street, please go and see it, and you'll be more impressed than I was.
That's fantastic. All right, so the Department of Sanitation does curbside collection of organics in some neighborhoods, serving approximately 3.5 million residents. The goal of the city's original 1OIC plan in 2015 was to offer organics collection citywide by 2018, last year. But that expansion was stalled due to a lack of funding.
Yeah.
Since the City Council has a major influence on the city's budget, can you speak to the support for organics collection among your colleagues and the likelihood that the city will expand organic collection anytime soon?
Well, the mayor came out and said that he wanted to do mandatory organics recycling. But then he said that he wants us to pass the legislation and that he would sign it. And it really is punting and playing politics with something that is extremely important and is actually one of his goals. I want to be clear. The mayor wanted to do this. but there's no money in the budget. There's not extra staff. We have issues with capacity. It's just layers and layers of things that the city has yet to do to help us achieve mandatory organic recycling citywide. We do need to pass legislation to make it mandatory. But right now, it isn't even voluntary citywide, right? And we feel like there are steps that need to be taken so that we can have a meaningful conversation about what that would look like citywide. And again, without an expansion of without an inclusion of more money to do that, I really don't see the commitment being real. And I'm concerned that we're letting politics in a different way drive the conversation so that we can get good headlines, but we don't put our money where our mouth is. And I feel like that might be happening here when it comes to organics and the mayor. And it's unfortunate because I think we got a great person. Captain Garcia is very excited about trying to push this, but at the end of the day, it's from the top. So I do want to say, I don't know when we're going to get an expansion on organics. But until we don't get a citywide voluntary organics, it makes it very difficult for us to build out the infrastructure for a mandatory one. So I'm very concerned about the viability of it in my time as a council member. I got 3 years left, and I don't know if in my time we would see mandatory organics.
I feel compelled to add that right now we're processing, or Waste Management's processing, and we are digesting about 130 tons a day of food scraps at Newtown Creek. We believe we have capacity for 500 there, just one of the 14 treatment facilities, and we have struggled to get the food waste. So it's really an unfortunate conundrum here with the lack of funding and also lack of participation. You know, I think that I talk a lot with people about, do you know what a brown bin's for? And it's still mysterious or misused or not used for a variety of reasons. And I attended the Brooklyn MSWAB Community Composting Forum. I think you stopped by, earlier this spring. And it was a really interesting conversation, but I always feel like it's the same people. And it's all of us who believe in this that come together and talk about it and get enthusiastic. And we're still missing a lot of people from the conversation. And I know, being in some of the hearings, that one of the things that the council's been asking OMB, the budget people, for is just money even to do education, right? To make sure that people know how to participate in these programs. So
we didn't get it in the budget this year.
It's tough. And I agree. I mean, having been now on the civil service side and understanding how some of these financial allocation, conversations go, it's really tricky, and I don't have any insight or recommendations, but continuing to talk about it and continuing, I think, to prove interest from the population. Sort of like if we were to have these meetings, people should be talking about, this is something that we, the people, want, right? We want organics, and we want education, and we want this to be a part of our Green New Deal.
Yeah, just to throw in a complementary point, this is, in effect, what Jennifer and what Antonio have just mentioned really highlights the significance of the remarks I was making at the front end, and that is about the relation between the local and the national, or the local and the regional, and the state and the national here. So the way most people who are thinking about the Green New Deal are thinking about it when it comes to the various functionalities at various levels of government will sort of discharge is basically every level of government would focus on what it does best, or what it's best situated to do. At the federal level, there are basically two things that that level is best situated to do. One is to coordinate regional or state or local efforts in a way to make sure that they're not at cross purposes, or to make sure that certain synergies or synergistic efficiencies might be realized. But much more important even than that, I think, is just to get the funding together, right? As you guys know, the United States issues its own currency, it issues its own treasury securities. They're the highest demanded financial asset in the world. The U.S. Treasuries market out there in the world is about $21 trillion worth, by far the world's largest financial market. The thing that the federal government does best is to marshal funding in order to direct it to beneficial or helpful projects. At least that's what we hope it'll do. And as you know, the current administration's tax cuts of late December, what came up to close to $2 trillion, showed us it's pretty easy to, basically spend a lot of money like that without generating inflationary sort of repercussions, but you can either do it in an unproductive way, in the way that we did in December of 2017, or you can do it in productive ways. And what could be more productive than to direct that kind of power, that kind of financial power, to the various localities that need it in order actually to rebuild our infrastructure from the ground up in every different locality in ways that render our environment more just, our economy more just, and of course our planet more sustainable. So that takes us back then to the really critical importance of these meetings, these local meetings, town halls, and the like that we're going to have. We really have to generate concrete wish lists as extensive as we can, so that when a new administration takes office in January of 2021, and when a new Congress takes office, when we have a new House and a new Senate in 2021, there will not be any lack of so-called shovel-ready projects that President Obama unfortunately faced when he took office in 2009. You'll recall that was the problem. There was plenty of funding available to engage in stimulus spending that would be productive in infrastructure restoring and so forth. But as President Obama at the time noted, there just weren't any shovel-ready projects. One of our tasks then, I think, at the local level and in meetings like this one, is to generate those shovel-ready projects. We want binders full of projects, so to speak, instead of binders full of women, for the new administration, right, to open up once they take office. And so I think that what the councilman has told us and what Jennifer has told us and what Ron mentioned before, these are just colossally important points. We've really got to get this thing, we've got to get the plans in place, so to speak, before January of 2021, because I guarantee when we get to that point, there's going to be an awful lot of funding. We're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar investment by the feds in localities that will then have their own shovel-ready projects to begin to break ground on, if not before, actually, 2020.
Two pieces of good news on organics, and then one call to action. So first piece of good news is there's about 20,000 New Yorkers that use the green market drop-off program, right? So that doesn't include the thousands of households that have the brown bins. That's 20,000 homes, New Yorkers who keep their food waste in their home all week and then schlep it down to the green market. And I want to bring that up as a point of good news, because you would be hard-pressed to find some other social initiative where 20,000 households voluntarily do something every day in their apartment and then once a week leave their apartment and walk a few blocks to do something. So I bring that up as an example of organics will be very successful in New York City. So that's a first piece of good news. Second piece of good news is that there is organics infrastructure starting to be built in New Jersey and upstate New York and Connecticut and Long Island. So slowly but surely we are starting to see that infrastructure come online along with what we have in DP. Now, here's the call to action. The lack of initiative and funding to expand curbside organics in New York City is an unfortunate and colossal example of short-termism. Yeah. And let me break that down to your tax dollars. We spend about $150 to $200 million a year exporting food waste to landfills. Over the next 10 years, if we don't do something different, we will spend $2 billion of our tax dollars to export food waste out of landfill. Now, that food waste instead could be used to generate clean energy in New York City. In fact, it can be turned into fuel for the sanitation vehicles. And so I'm going to make a prediction. This will get done. We've got great leaders who understand this. One of them sitting next to me. Another one, we see Gail Brewer in the back there. All right. So this will get done, and 10 years from now, 15 years from now, New York City sanitation vehicles will be running off of the fuel generated by our food waste. Like, that technology exists today to do it. There are municipalities that are already doing it in California. And 30 years from now, someone will be in a classroom somewhere and they'll learn that New York City used to spend $200 million a year exporting its food waste out of landfill, and then it would spend hundreds of millions of dollars importing fuel into the city, and their response will be like, nah, like, no, they didn't do that, right? It's just like 100 years ago, sanitation vehicles, which at the time were a horse and buggy, used to line up by the East River. We actually have these pictures. Oh my. New York City sanitation or a horse and buggies. And they would line up to dump in the East River, right? Today, people see that picture, they go like, what are you talking about? It will be the same thing about the fact that we weren't using food waste for clean energy locally.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Professor Hockett, the shift from an American economy of potentially endless growth to a circular economy of reduced consumption is thought to be required to combat climate change. I know a lot of people in the room feel that way. And do you agree? And if so, how do you sell this new economic model to the American public?
So I confess just simply not to not knowing. I really don't know. I mean, in some sense, I think that an economy that's sustainable has to be circular, right? The question, whether that means an economy that doesn't grow in terms of, say, material wealth or material well-being, I think is another question. My view, I'm sort of, I guess, metabolically optimistic. I mean, I can give you reasons to be pessimistic, but I'm always optimistic anyway. And my view when it comes to things like growth is that we are likely, if we get this right, to continue to advance in terms of our material well-being and our material health and our material wealth, if we understand wealth not simply in dollars and cents terms, or not simply in just accumulating more stuff like especially plastic stuff, you know, devices and the like. But if we think of growing wealth, or if we think of economic growth going forward in terms of longer lifespans, higher quality of life for as long as we do live, fewer diseases, fewer chronic ailments and illnesses, much more pleasant environments in which to live, that's a kind of growth too, and indeed, you know, when we use the word progress in a way that's not cynical or sort of cynically euphemistic, I think that's what we mean by progress, and I think that's what we ought to mean by growth. Now, note that doesn't mean necessarily, right, sucking up more and more or extracting more and more of the Earth's resources without replenishing them, and it doesn't mean, you know, basically just kind of throwing away stuff that we've used recently and extracting more in order to make more to use now. It can also mean, of course, recycling or reusing various materials that we've already used. And as the word cycle embedded in the word recycle suggests, there's something circular about that. That would be a kind of circular economy. But so I guess to sort of sum up the way I view this, is it seems to me that a circular economy, in this sense, is entirely compatible with the forever growing economy, as long as we understand growth in the terms that I just advanced, basically growing quality of life, again, improved lives, lengthier lifespans, fewer diseases, fewer disease-struck people, more and more cures for more and more illnesses and ailments, less and less crime and misery and psychological distress and so forth. That's all, I think, growth in the only sense in which growth ever has mattered. And I think any economist who you actually interrogated, rather than just letting sort of, you know, talk his head off at you or her head off at you, if you press them, they would be forced ultimately to admit that that's what growth really means, at least as far as growth is interesting. And insofar as that's the case, then I think growth is quite compatible with the circular economy. Indeed, I think growth in that sense is an inevitable byproduct of a properly constructed circular economy. The circulation or the circularness of that kind of economy itself is precisely part of what makes the quality of life get better, what makes wealth in the right sense grow. And in that sense, then a circular economy understood in the right way actually generates forever growth in the right sense of that word growth. I hope that is somewhat responsive, at least.
That's pretty good.
Yes, thank you.
That's really good.
This question is for Jen and Ron, given your time in city government. Recently, the Manhattan and the Brooklyn swabs, we haven't talked about the Brooklyn swab, but there's a swab in Brooklyn, and there will hopefully soon be an official swab in Queens.
Yeah.
So the Manhattan and Brooklyn swabs, excuse me? I didn't
Oh boy.
hear that. Yes.
Oh,
Yes, thank you. Borough
still
President.
Yankees versus Dodgers, it sounds like.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so the Manhattan Borough Swab sent a letter to the Mayor's Office of Contracts asking to learn more about the city's environmental procurement policies. Given your time in city government, how do you see government procurements, playing a role in the concepts we've been discussing tonight?
you want me to go first?
Please.
Okay, I have the shortest time in city government, so 1.5 years to be accurate. So in those 1.5 years, I've learned that New York City government procurement is a nightmare. I'm sorry, but it's really, I was looking at something in preparation because we had sort of a heads up about some of these questions, and we have a map at DEP of the steps for issuing a public bid procurement. There are 105. And each one can take a month. It's really astounding. And coming from the private sector, it's one of the hardest things for me to understand, utilize to achieve some of the goals that have been, come down from the mayor and the council that we embrace. I work in the Office of Energy, and we want to do all this stuff. Many of us come from the private sector bringing skills, expertise, enthusiasm, and we want to do all this stuff. Procurement is very difficult in the city. So I guess what I'm encouraged, though, is that maybe we could make that better. And I think there are also people who are within city government who want to focus on that. But I also have realized the real immense power, right? If you can find new ways to contract, find new ways to procure things, and think about different ways to do services. And I'll talk about one example that I'm sort of tangentially involved in, but we hope to maybe replicate as within the DEP. So at Newtown Creek that we've talked a bit about already this evening, there's a public-private partnership-ish going on with National Grid. And we have a procured contract with them that took about 10 years to clean up that anaerobic digester gas that we talked about and inject it into the local grid for reuse by New Yorkers. So circular economy right there. So it can be done. It takes a long time, and it takes getting many on those 105-step process comfortable with new ways of doing things and new concepts and new relationships between the city and other sort of partners in these types of projects. So I'm hopeful there's some precedent, but I think there's a long way to go in how we make that faster so that we can have like shovel-ready projects. One thing I learned, it takes 2 or 3 years to even design something, and that has to be a separate contract unless that was changed in the legislature yesterday, which I'm not sure if we can do design build. But in any event, I'll stop there.
So I think it's a great question. Unfortunately, in the history of New York, there's been a lot of corruption, which is why we now have very stringent procurement rules, and so they're there for a reason. In many cases, they need to be there. In other cases, they actually kind of work against progress in the city. But one thing that I'd like to propose, and our firm provides financing to a lot of municipal recycling programs around the city, is that if you're a company that provides a product to a city and you are buying recycled material out of the local recycling program and using it to manufacture that product that you then sell to the city, you're putting money into the city. You're buying that material from the local recycling facility. They get a profit. They pay taxes. They have a revenue share with the local municipality. They're also hiring people locally, and there's a payroll tax and income tax and so on and so forth. So you buy recycled material locally, use it for a product that you sell to a local city. You're putting a lot of value into the system. In the procurement process, why are you being treated the same as some company that is using some extractive resource like virgin petroleum or metal? We should have incentives in place for companies that are selling to the city who have bought out of the local recycling program. And that may be a tax credit, it may be some other incentive, but I think that would go a long way in motivating a lot of companies to call up our local recycling facilities and say, I'll buy as much as you can.
Great, thanks. And just one more thing on that.
Dr. Kevin Lyons at Rutgers did a really interesting circular economy model in Newark about this, he did this study to say, like, okay, this guy's making t-shirts over here, and this guy, like, has cotton, but this guy's buying his cotton from, like, China, right? Or something like that, to sort of say, how can we do more of that matching? And I agree, incentives need to be in place for this type of behavior to latch on.
Like Pratt pays New York City for its paper, recycles it locally in Staten Island, turns it into a pizza box locally in Staten Island. Why would we ever buy someone else's box as New York City government, especially some company that wasn't using recycled cardboard? We need to create incentives and recognition for the leaders, not just penalties for the laggards.
Well, I'm skipping around a lot. I want to just pose the question, like, Green New Deal, like, programs that we've been talking tonight, are they, what blend of carrot and stick are they? Like, what's the role for regulations and what's the role for incentives? Because you just said incentives, but couldn't we just regulate to require those, the things that we want to see? And this is open to everyone who wants to.
I can throw out a couple of quick thoughts. I mean, in general, I think you need both carrots and sticks, but also in general, insofar as it's possible to accomplish something with a carrot or a stick, presumably the carrot is preferable. My impression is that a lot of what prevents or stands in the way of a lot of people's making sensible changes is a kind of inertia on the one hand, just force of habit, but also just a kind of a sense that, well, I can't afford to do things differently, right? Or basically there would be such a fundamental change in the sort of infrastructure of my own life that it would require a big sort of uprooting or upending of my own life too much, or our particular practices in a particular city or a particular institution too much to change simply because we've been told to do so. And if we're threatened with being penalized if we don't, that's of course going to put a burr under our saddle, or whatever the metaphor should be, and get us to move a little bit. But we're going to be kind of resentful and maybe dragging our feet and so forth. And so if it's possible actually to make this sort of change easier for folk by actually doing it, or offering financial assistance or advisory assistance or logistical assistance or what have you, then that would seem to be the right route to go. A related point I think it's worth making is something that you can almost think of as, it's not really carrot or stick, it's more like momentum provision or something. So, a story that a lot of Americans don't seem to know that's actually quite interesting, I think, is that, back before the early 20th century, America primarily used coal as a source of power. And at some point it was realized that 100 years ago, petroleum would be a preferable source of power, but the infrastructure had already been developed around coal. And so there was a kind of a path dependence, or a kind of an inertia that kind of led people to keeping on using coal. And one thing that really made a fundamental difference almost overnight was when the U.S. military decided to start fueling its vehicles with petroleum rather than coal. And all of a sudden you have a major market actor, a public sector market actor, actually providing a market for something that there hadn't been in concentrated form before. And once that kind of thing happens, it can become a catalyst for a lot of more individual and decentralized action that converges on that same focal point. But the problem, the real key point, is that the focal point doesn't exist until some large actor can come in and bust up the present momentum and make that the new focal point. So when the military decided it was going to move to petroleum, that gave the focal point, it provided the market, and all of a sudden everybody saw that, well, that's the future. And that itself operated as a kind of carrot, but sort of like a stick too. Like, I better get, pardon the pun, but I better get on the stick and get on, get with this new form of energy. Now, of course, now I think it's sort of picking up on a point that Ron made before. I think it's kind of astonishing that we're still using carbon-based fuels and even petroleum. And I suspect maybe even 50 years from now, people are going to be saying, are you kidding me? I mean, we've existed for 3,000 years or 4,000 as a civilization, and we're still burning stuff. I mean, that's still how we power stuff. It's like lighting stuff on fire. I mean, there's got to be an effing better way to do things. And I think everybody sees that, everybody gets that, but somebody's got to kind of, again, bust up the momentum and sort of push things in a certain way to act as a catalyst. And usually it has to be somebody big, right? Somebody who moves markets and isn't just a kind of price taker, so to speak, but as a price maker or as an action causer. And so I think that what that means in turn then is that we really ought to be thinking more creatively about the kinds of carrots that we can offer, especially if we're going to have a lot of federal financing, which again we're going to have in the form of trillions of dollars, and the capacity for federal agencies, but for state and local government agencies as well, themselves to be the trendsetters. You do that well enough, and there's going to be an awful lot of voluntary following on the part of the private sector, and that will minimize the amount of stick swinging that will be necessary, even though some will presumably always be necessary.
Well, thank you. So I want to take one more opportunity to ask a question of all the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So the question is, we've been talking a lot about big systems, government decisions. Let's talk about personal decisions. What are some of the ideas that you'd like to share with the audience about what we can do as individuals to fight climate change? Open to the...
So you could ride a bike. Sorry. I think, so I just want to say I'm learning a lot and I appreciate this panel so much so because of it. But I always think the stick approach is always the best approach. It seems like there's too much money and too much influence to allow for people to make the decisions like on merit. They end up making it for the wrong reason. So originally I wasn't that way, but I guess my 6 long years in city government have taught me that you should just apply the stick as much as possible. And so I've come from I've grown into a different type of legislator, I guess. It's like regulated, and it's the only way it's going to get done. And and I'm in the trash business, so trash has been done the same way since like the 1970s. I think it's been almost exactly the same way. But yeah, I do think that a big part of who I am is that I want to break car culture. It's something that is starting to gain some momentum. I think buildings emit more greenhouse gases and so forth than any other entity or whatever you want to call it. But vehicles are what I think is the visible, the more visible and easier, I guess, entity again to tackle. And I think we should really be focusing on the over-reliance of vehicles, the giving of parking spaces for private vehicle use, and really just start being aggressive and forthright about giving that space back to the people. And I'm telling you that that's going to be something that's extremely meaningful in the near future. So I would say ride a bike.
Would any of the other panelists like to add to that?
Yeah, I have
Q&A?
to, because the new one NYC, right, car-free New York by 2050. So I told my kids that, and they're like, yeah, right. What all these people are going to get out of their cars? It's like, wow, yeah, that's a big change. But that's a segue to the thing that I think we all can do. I talk to people all the time about the choices that we make and the impacts that it have. I talk to people who don't want to talk to me about it. I'm very ostentatious, especially in environments where people may be unfamiliar with these types of things. Like in the office, I'm always, bringing in reusable everything. I go to the farm share and lay the lettuce on my desk, and people are like, what is that? I'm like, oh, there's a farm share here. You can, eat fresh vegetables, pick it up every Thursday. And it's, I carpool. Yeah, I carpool with people. I have to go. I have to leave. I'm going to be my carpool. But just being very upfront about the fact that sometimes it's more work, and those 20,000 people should be, like the new sanitation ad campaign, right? Just be loud and proud about carrying your food scraps on the train or down the street, or I offer to take people's, do you want me to take that leftover for you? I'd be happy to responsibly recycle it. And it catches people off guard, but I think we have to start talking like that, or the message isn't going to get out to there's, I think, still a lot of people that need to hear it, and there are some people who are going to choose not to, and that's why I'm afraid I agree with you on the stick thing at some level.
And just to clarify that One NYC 2050 goal is a car optional city. It's not a car free city. It's a car optional
I'm not going to revise.
clarify.
Nothing bothers me more than this car-free NYC that we do every year in the city of New York. It's like car-free for like 4 blocks. It's the most annoying. I've never participated in it. I refuse to participate in it. It's just such a scam. And it's like we have to, it's everything, whether it's organics, whether it's car-free NYC, all these things that we're doing so that we can catch headlines but are not meaningful, we either don't participate or we got to protest, so we got to stand up against it. But I applaud you for what you do. I'm doing organic recycling in my house too, and I got 4 bins right now, and it's a disaster. But I'm so dedicated and so committed to it. And I actually have a staff member that brings her compost from her house in Queens to my front yard so that we could put it inside the bin. There's like little things like that. They add up, and when people start seeing it, it's contagious. And our children, we need to educate the young people as well. If you educate a child, you'll do more for the environment than whatever you can possibly do individually. That's awesome.
You want to go? You want me to go? Yeah, just I mean, I kind of do what these guys do, although I'm going to spin it slightly differently because I'm afraid of sticks, I guess. But I sort of do something that's sort of halfway between a carrot and a stick, yet again in this case. So I ride a bike most places I go, and I wear a ridiculously large helmet. It's very comical. It makes me look like a space alien. And the point, and I keep it on until I get to the desk because I want people to see me in it. And it's completely undignified, right? I'm wearing a suit or something, and I've got, I roll up my trouser legs up above my knees. I don't use those clips or anything. I roll them up to make it as primitive as possible, to look as ridiculous as possible. And then people see me coming in, like with some briefcase slung over my back or something like that. And when they see that, it's a bit like me saying, would you like me to take your stuff so that I can recycle it responsibly? But I don't have to use the word responsibly in this particular case. I can just look foolish, and they go, what's that all about? Well, I ride a bike, don't you? Doesn't everybody? That kind of thing I do a lot. I walk a lot of places as well. In fact, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to people's parties or gatherings, and somebody recognizes me from having seen me walk, and they say, "Hey, I know you. You walk." And yeah, that's what I do. Yeah, I walk. I live in a great neighborhood for that. But those kinds of things, and of course, another thing that's been verged upon, I think, already, but just in case the idea didn't get all the way across, I mean, farmers markets are pretty cool too, right? Buying local and going to restaurants that serve locally sourced foods, and going to supermarkets and the like that also sell locally sourced stuff. That's another very helpful thing to do. And I always think that half of the value of doing this is actually doing it, basically participating in a more circular sort of economy. But the other value, I think, does connect up with what Antonio and what Jennifer were saying. If you're somewhat ostentatious about it, but in a way that maybe doesn't feel so preachy as to be alienating, but nevertheless does make people feel kind of subconsciously a little bit guilty or deficient, then so much the better. That's the way to do it.
Thank you. And
So before I get to my comment, just funny helmet story. I also have a massive bike helmet. It's called the brand is called Nutcase, and it's this big helmet. And usually I city bike around the city, but usually I go to meetings with that helmet, and more often than not, I get this look. People go, "Oh, you ride a motorcycle?" And I go, "No, it's a city bike." And the reaction to people's faces is pretty wild. Everything from like, "I thought you were cool," to like, "Oh, you ride a city bike." But yeah, so.
But before you move, I want to do a helmet story too. I'm a council member, and I have to fight bike lanes every single time one gets proposed. But I walk to my community board, but I make sure I bring my helmet. So I wasn't even on my bike, but I make sure I bring it. Because every time I bring it, people are really loud and they're upset, and then they see me come up and put my helmet down before I speak, and everything tones down. So little things like that mean something. You're right that you make people feel guilty and things like that. When I was So I was going to go deeper into that, but bring your helmet everywhere. It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
We actually, I'll get to my point. We passed a rule last summer for all of our interns: no city biking to or from the office without a helmet. And we actually bought a couple of helmets because I was like, I can't deal with like somebody getting hurt on the way to or from. But they're all at that age where they're like, I don't need. I'm like, yeah, you do. But anyway, so my quick thing on things. So what I would suggest is. I find there to be way too much on both sides of the aisle, both ends of the spectrum, way too much self-righteousness in the U.S. today. And I'll give the example around what we've all been talking about, waste and recycling. So on the left and more progressive side, I'm in plenty of people's homes in New York City, affluent, middle income, low income, and I'll sit there listening to like people, screaming about Trump. They've got a picture of Scott Pruitt up on their dartboard that they're throwing at, right? And 50% of the time I'll look around and they do a good job recycling and composting. 50% of the time I look around, not so good, right? And now on the flip side, I'm in some people's homes in New York City who, they want to categorize themselves as necessarily like Trump supporters, but they're more of a traditional, Republican, fiscally conservative. Don't tax me. I work hard. I made my money. Leave me alone. And I'll look around at their home and I go, they're not recycling either. And over a meal, I'll say, when did you decide that society should subsidize your lifestyle? And they'll look at me like, what are you talking about? Like, I work hard, I pay as little taxes as I have to, but I pay my taxes and I don't believe in welfare and people should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And I said, well, that's all really interesting, but when you take recyclables and put them in the garbage, I have to then have my tax dollars used to subsidize the exporting of your recyclables out of the city. Mm-hmm. And their reaction usually is like, nobody ever, explained that to me. And hopefully they change their behavior. But I bring that up because I think in the U.S., we could all do a better job, whatever your political persuasion is, of a little bit less self-righteousness, a little bit more like actually living our values. Because if we can do a little bit more of that, behavior change can actually go a long way in making the world a better place. We do need more policy. We do need more legislation, but the low-hanging fruit is just each of us individually just like doing a little bit better.
Quick thing.
Could I have the two volunteers that are going to be helping me with Q&A come up to the stage while you
Sure. Yeah. Just one quick, another thing I think that's highlighted by what Ron just said is a lot of people don't know the whole system, right, that some particular activity is part of. And if they're just made to know what that whole system is, and hence made to know what the consequences or implications of some of their actions are, they'll often change quite voluntarily, irrespective of political persuasion, right? It's often said that if people knew how their food was made or how it was processed, they wouldn't eat it or they would demand change. And it's often said that if people kind of understood how we deal with people when they die, they would want to change that too, but we tend to leave it all off to the side. So, I think we can go a really long way without even having to moralize or be self-righteous, simply by informing people of the larger systems within which more narrow activities take place, because then they can see those consequences and then they'll see the right thing to do and they won't have to be told.
Thank you. Okay.
Excellent point.
Those are all really good stories and advice, and thank you. I want to open up to audience Q&A. Raise your hand if you have a question. All right. So I saw that hand go up first, and then in the front, and then Kendall. So.
Two questions. One is on the government side of things, how easily it can flip. You mentioned recycling started in the city in 1989, and when Mayor Bloomberg came in, he canceled the recycling program. And then he changed his mind. It took a number of years to get it back up again. And who's to say with so maybe we get all the sidewalk composting in place, and the next mayor comes in and just cancels it. So what can be done that will be like what they just did in Albany with the rent regulations, that it doesn't come up every 5 years? It's supposedly in place permanently. That's one thing. And the other has to do with how we can get more people to, as you say, to be more involved without making them feel bad about it. You know, the composting, for instance, I have trouble with people in my building who are worried about insects and so on, and it just isn't an issue at all. Thanks.
I'm going to let some others answer that, but first I just want to put a shout out. Brendan Sexton's in the audience, right? The lights are bright, but he was the sanitation commissioner in New York City when recycling was started. So big.
And he's a Manhattan MSWAB member.
Yeah, and then I'll just add one quick thing, and then I think some other folks can do a better job answering. I think the last comment around making sure that we do a really good job of informing people why we're asking them to do it. I think everybody in this movement could do a better job of informing people of why we're asking them to do this and why it benefits themselves, their community, and so on and so forth. I thought the last point was very relevant and important, but I'll let some other folks sort of address the legislation specifically.
I would say we have to make it economically viable. If the reason that, what I understand, and forgive me if I don't know my history too well, is that Bloomberg, we had economic downturn and thought we could save money by canceling our recycling. Organics, we spent almost $200 million sending organics to landfill. Should we do a good job at removing that from the waste stream, the city would actually save money. So even through an economic downturn, it's smart for us to continue to do organics recycling. So I guess what I would say is make sure whatever system we put in place doesn't only make sense for the environment, and in this case, like organics, actually makes sense for the economy. So I actually think it's something that's sustainable long term, and a lot more sustainable than just the environmental portion of it. Is also economic sustainability. So that's what I would say to that.
And I think sometimes we have to dig into what the economics are. So that's one of the reasons I really like digestion, because you have the ability to divert and have an outlet for the food scraps. But when you tie it to energy production, and particularly our efforts to have a resilient grid and to make power where we need it, I think you start to build programs that are more difficult to disassemble if you've got benefits beyond maybe just financial. And I really hope that we can start to think more about what those benefits are and incorporate them into our policy. I was very impressed that the City Council started to talk about carbon pricing in some of the intros this year. So I think that's encouraging. As far as getting people to participate, that's a tough one, and I sometimes feel like you have to acknowledge their negative experiences, because sometimes it can be gross and icky, and okay, fair, but the response I've come up with to that recently is your food waste is going to be gross and icky whether it's in your compost bin or whether it's in your trash bag. Where you're putting it really isn't changing that. We're very comfortable with the black bag thing, but you can use liners for those containers, and so trying to break down those perceived differences and barriers to source separation, maybe.
Okay, next question.
Council member Reynoso, you lightly touched upon education.
Yes.
I wonder why our school systems don't have, from kindergarten or preschool all the way up, a curriculum for waste management and recycling and reuse. That's very important, and we need to do that. And then, Mr. Gonan, you touched upon responsibility. Well, I think you are on the forefront of producer responsibility, and we need to get that out there to the producers, and that we can recycle and reintroduce the waste back to the people that are selling us the boxes and the cans. And then one last thing.
Go on.
Ready? Is size reduction and cleaning up our curbs and a curb appeal. If we were to densify and put out a better product on a curb, that's going to increase the quality of life for our community. It's going to reduce the amount of obstacles that we traverse every day going up and down the streets, and the bags and the trash and the rodents, and it just goes on and on. Can you comment on that?
So the education to our young people, and I know shout out to Cafeteria Culture that's here and the work that they do. I agree. There's nothing better. I think that we can do than educate our young people. There are programs and initiatives that the city is beginning to take on to educate young people how to recycle. They want to enter all the schools into organics programs. And make sure that it's like an educational way to get it done. They have trash teams in some schools. So I think we're starting that process, and it's part of why I wanted to get an increase in the marketing budget for the Department of Sanitation so they can do this type of work. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think we're falling short right now. And I don't know if I can legislate that, teaching people how to recycle as part of the curriculum in the city of New York. I don't know if I can do that. My legislative director is here. If there's anything we can do to make it so that these kids have to learn that, I'll consider it.
You have a council member Brewer in the back. You team up together, you might get further.
Yeah, I'll definitely be talking to the borough president. And then you had this third part of your question. Could you repeat the third part? Because I wanted to say something about it and I forgot already.
The producer responsibility?
No, the second part then.
Curb appeal?
Curb appeal.
Curb appeal.
I'm gonna. My legislative director is looking at me because it hasn't been drafted yet. But I am actually going to be looking into piloting a program that allows for us to take trash to a corner, not leaving it in front of your house. So it's probably gonna. So what I want to do is make sure that I can take. I want to be clear, parking space, not a sidewalk space. So that we can have a central location. It's better for the workers. It's better for the block. I think we're one of the few progressive cities that still allows for people to just put as much trash as they want right in front of their house. So I want to modify. We're going to probably do a pilot to introduce that. So it might be coming to a community near you. Don't be upset. But so I am thinking about that. In general, I think we have other issues that we have to take on where we put city bikes on our sidewalks, and we do a lot of things we put on our sidewalks because we believe the car culture is the most important thing. So I'm trying to break all those things down, but the trash thing, I definitely want to start modifying that, and that's coming soon.
The use of PSAs. We used to have PSAs all the time, public service announcements.
Yeah.
You don't see that anymore.
The budget for marketing for the Department of Sanitation is a joke. It is a joke. I asked for $2.5 million, which is also a joke. And like when you think about what we need to get done, and I didn't get it this year. I ask for it every year and I never get it because they think that they do satisfactory work, I guess, in educating people. But I'm the chair of sanitation. I make mistakes on my recycling all the time. And it's just that the education isn't there. But I really feel like these rooms are great, and I feel comfortable because we're preaching to the choir for the most part. But for some reason, it just doesn't resonate in a meaningful way to City Hall and the admin. And they're treating us like they're treating trash like a stepchild policy. So I hear you. You're all good points, and how we're falling short across the board. I hear you.
So we only have 10 more minutes for questions. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So 10 more minutes for questions. We had a question from Kendall, and then on the side over there. Okay.
Thanks, Kate. Great job. A quick comment and a question for Jen and a question for Ron. So Jen, just a reminder to people in the room that 10 years ago, beneficial use of the city's biosolids was standard practice. And the Bloomberg administration discovered it was cheaper to send it to landfills, took advantage of that, and now you're in the position of having to rebuild that program. So just so people have that sense of context. And for Ron, a question about job creation related to recycling, as we talked about the opportunities in the Green New Deal. The headline today in Construction and Demolition Recycling magazine was robotic invasion. And as you know, recycling facilities are increasingly low on jobs and high on automation, optical sorting, robotic sorting, and the like. As you look at the recycling field, where do you see the opportunities for significant job creation?
It's a great question. We see significant job opportunity in the production of products using recycled content. So the jobs that today are often in most recycling facilities, they're very challenging occupations that once someone can get just a little bit of a better job, they're going to be off to take that other job. If you've ever visited a recycling facility, we have optical sorters, we have eddy currents, we have a lot of advanced technology. Unfortunately, we also have a lot of people who are literally, for 7 out of 8 hours of workday, literally just standing on their feet trying to like sort out contamination. It's very cold in the winter. It's very hot in the summer. It's a job, but it's not the type of job that we believe people should have. And I think robotics is going to solve a lot of that. Now, the other thing that robotics does from a job creation standpoint is you're now creating higher quality bales, which can be used by the local manufacturing industry. And there you actually have really good green jobs because now you're focused on actually manufacturing things locally. So that's where we think robotics will have a lot of impact, is in increasing local manufacturing jobs around their use of recycled content. Do you mind if I just, he had a comment about responsibility. Do you mind if I just
Quickly.
So one of the things that we've really been stressing is it costs most recycling facilities about $70 a ton to process recyclables. And so one of the things that we've really been pushing is, and this goes back to the comment around getting information out there, is the real question is, who's going to pay? So when a company puts a product or package out into the market, if it's using a type of material that a recycling facility can recycle and sell for over $70 a ton, the question of who's paying is nobody. Everyone's actually making money. But if a company, like this was the example with styrofoam, is putting a product or package into the market that the recycling facility can't pay for over $70 a ton, or can't sell for over $70 a ton, then you got the question of like, who's going to pay, right? Our belief is it shouldn't be the taxpayer, right? So you got to figure out who's going to pay. When you start asking that question, you start getting companies who are putting product and packaging into the market that can't be sold for over $70 a ton in the recycling market. They start to think about innovating because they don't want to have to bear that cost.
Great, thank you. So there were some questions in the aisle, another one on the aisle, and then we'll look at the timing after those. Yes, that was.
Hi, my name is Josh Bisker. I'm a urban planner, a solid waste management systems researcher, and I started a bike co-op in the council members district. It's a repair cooperative. It's thriving. Come. It's called the Mechanical Gardens. My question is about the Green New Deal and regional coordination. So one of the things that happened in the original New Deal is there was a regional coordination of a lot of things that in the last 70 years we have really stopped doing at any kind of regional scale. Right now, municipal boundaries, sometimes county boundaries, are kind of the limit for how we do things. That doesn't work for resiliency and disaster management and solid waste. None of that works. So if we look only inside of the city, then we're stuck trying to deal with carting as a separate issue from transport, as a separate issue from end use, as a separate issue from rebuying and remanufacturing. None of that works. We talk about solid waste management systems. We don't have a system. We have a bunch of different individual balkanized parts, and we all suffer. The question of who pays is we all pay, but anybody who actually has to put dollars in gets to externalize the costs to the next actor and say, well, they pay for the roads of carting the stuff, or they pay for the emissions to their neighborhood. So, in the Green New Deal, what have been the conversations so far about regional coordination? It's like the hardest thing at the moment I can think of for the federal government to try to do better in any way. They don't do anything very well at the moment, but like trying to coordinate regional bodies across current jurisdictions, that seems like the golden silver bullet, golden thread for how to make solid waste management work for people in the country. What can we look forward to? What are people talking about?
So yeah, I mean that's a colossally important point, right? And it was one of the things that made the New Deal itself such a success in some ways, even while there were failings in other ways, was precisely the fact that the administration and all of those involved in the planning and the carrying out of the New Deal understood that, right, some of the questions that had to be dealt with were sort of regional in scope. Others were more inherently local in scope, and others were all the way up at the top, sort of purely federal in scope. And the key question then was, which things were best sort of put where at those particular levels, and then how best to coordinate both within or sort of on each level, and then among and between levels. Now, it took a while for the New Dealers to figure out just how to do that. And part of that was because the New Deal itself was a kind of an ongoing, in a way, national deliberation. People tend to think, oh, the New Deal, it just happened, it's just this one-off thing, it just happened, and then one day you didn't have it, the next day you did have it. But the details were actually worked out over time, and it was a very experimental sort of program's not quite the right word, but an experimental sort of vision. It was very experimental and participatory in spirit. So the idea was, and this is partly thanks to Roosevelt, but probably more thanks to one of the real brains, one of the principal brains behind the New Deal itself, and that was, of course, Frances Perkins, who a lot of you know got her start in the settlement movement, and we're sort of in one product of that movement right now in this venue. And she had been his Secretary of State in New York. She developed many of what became the New Deal plans and programs while working at the state level, and she just simply brought them up to Washington. And they would try something out, and if it worked, they would scale it up and carry it further. And if it didn't seem to be working, they would scrap it and try something new. And I think everybody involved in the Green New Deal is seeing the Green New Deal in the same way. It's a grand sort of national deliberation. You can view the resolution that was proposed in February as the sort of opening gavel in what's meant to be this big national deliberation. And what that means in turn is that everybody's thoughts, everybody's ideas as to what ought to be done at what level, well, first, what ought to be done, period, then what ought to be done at what level, and what should be coordinated between localities or between states or across regions, and what should be coordinated all the way up. It's sort of all up for grabs in a way at the moment, but you can get some initial hints at least as to where that's all going to go. If you think about, well, who has expertise in what? So city and urban and regional planners who are in the academies all over the country, this is what they do, right? This is what you do. And so, we obviously need your thoughts on all of this stuff because, there's just no way that even 10 or 100 or even 1,000 Green New Dealers can do this right. It really has to be something like 300 million people, right? But various people have various expertises. And I'm sorry, this is sort of a wishy-washy answer, but basically just sort of, it's a way of throwing the question back at you. Please tell us what you think we ought to do. Although I feel badly saying us too, because you are also one of us, right? So we should tell one another, right, what we know about this. But if you have expertise in that, then the nation needs your input on that, right? And if others have expertise in other things, of course, the nation needs their input on that.
Thank you. I saw a hand up earlier, and I just want to say that this is going to be the last question, but we hope to continue the conversation in the Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board, in the other solid waste advisory boards, in the town halls, in so many other venues, online, social media, but also tonight, some of us are going to be going to a bar that serves food nearby, Eastwood, on Clinton and East Broadway. So if you have a burning question that you weren't able to ask, please join us, or come up to one of us afterwards. And so the question is yes. Thank
you all of you. It's been such an educational experience. My question is this: do you think it might be possible that through the Green New Deal, we collectively can become that major actor that makes the big difference? For example, if we all say we don't want excessive packaging that can't be recycled. We don't want high-rise built unless they're passive house, net zero energy. We don't want energy of any sort unless it's renewable, so that if collectively we do this, we can overcome those corporations that are giving us the other side that we have to fight against. So that collectively we become that big actor that is demanding that we have circular economies and all of the things that you've talked so beautifully about this evening. Thank you.
I think the answer is yes. I mean, one slogan of President Obama's that I always loved, but sort of regretted that it wasn't really followed through on as much as it might have been, is the slogan that we are the change that we've been seeking. I think that was literally true then, and it's literally true now. The problem then was that the we involved didn't end up organizing in an optimal manner to make it all happen, and in particular didn't organize in a manner that enabled them to overcome the obstructionist opposition, and indeed, I think, outright racist opposition that was generated from some quarters of Congress and some media outlets and some sort of astroturfed so-called movements involving hot beverages as part of their name. I think we've got to do that better this time, right? And I think part of doing that better this time is to begin the organizing now, before the campaign is even really fully underway. And there's a massive infrastructure that's already beginning to kind of crystallize and coalesce. So there are other groups that you guys have heard of that are part of the whole thing, and they're quite conspicuous. There's the Sunrise Movement. Every major city and all even smaller cities in the country have Sunrise branches. There's the Democratic Socialists of America, right? The DSA, right? There's the Justice Democrats. There's New Consensus. All of these groups are social movements that are pretty impressively organized already. They're the ones who brought us AOC. They're the ones who brought us the other 50 or so sort of quasi-AOCs who were elected last November. And they're the ones who are already recruiting and finding and getting behind the next wave of probably 200 or 300 AOCs that are going to be hitting the, basically seeking people's votes next November, well, 18 months from now. And we ought to be hooking up with them. I mean, that's just part of what I do. And I think that all of us ought to be sort of connecting with all of this infrastructure. The other thing is I do at least as much work for Bernie Sanders as I do for AOC. And Bernie's got a very impressive movement infrastructure, as you know. It never fell apart after 2016. It's been there latent all along, and it's really picking up. So we ought to be also connecting with anybody we know or can reach in these various movements and basically be joining forces. And again, this sounds kind of pie in the sky, airy-fairy, hippy-dippy, and so forth, but I really am talking about something very practical, and that is about actually organizing, and so that we actually can literally be the change, not just aspiring to be the change that we've been seeking all along. I think you're exactly right. We can do it. It's what we have to do, and we have to do it better this time than we did in 2008.
I'm going to invite back up to the stage Jackie Ottman, the chair of the Manhattan SWAB.
Turn this on? Oh, thank you. Thank you to our panelists for coming and sharing your time and your expertise. Thank you, Kate, for a great job moderating. Give another hand. Okay, so the cat is out of the bag. Ms. Gail Brewer, Manhattan Borough President, is in the room. Gail is very special to the SWAB. Without her, the SWAB would not exist in its current form. Without Gail, whose idea was for tonight, we might not even be in this room. Gail, what would you like to share with us tonight?
No. Thank you very much. This is an amazing panel. I go to thousands and thousands of meetings, and this is the best. So congratulations. I mean that. Thank you, Jackie and SWAB. I must admit, I'm very competitive. So when I hear about a national Green Deal, I said, hell no. We're going to do one in New York City. We're going to do one in Manhattan. And you have done more than I could ever imagine. So congratulations to the panel. I can't thank you enough. So these are really hard topics. The council member and I have to work with them every single day. And I love seeing Ron, because the last time I saw him, he was in a school. I think he had just started his job. He didn't know what the hell he was doing at Sanitation. And he walked in, and I remember we had gifts and prizes for the staff who were doing organics in the school. Because you have to, at least there's a carrot for thanking city workers who do a great job, particularly at that level. And I remember you were so great and gracious to that staff. So that's a big deal. I want to say that from the sort of daily efforts of how do you make a city that's this big something that really is green, and that's what you've all been doing and what some of the questions were about today. And I must admit, I love big policy, but I always want to know, how do you implement it? Because that's what really makes the difference in people's lives. So the fact that you are thinking about these issues, we have tried on a couple of levels. One of them is just the whole food issue, which is of great interest to New Yorkers, and you mentioned some of that. So when we have food, we obviously have to get rid of it, but we also have to get it. So how do we make sure that the city of New York purchases locally from the farmers upstate? Just that, I think, is part of the Green Deal. Because if you have lettuce bouncy from California, where you can just get it from the Catskills and it has a longer shelf life, it saves not only the better food, healthier food, but also longer shelf life, and also transportation is reduced. So there's so many ways. Thank you, Council Member, very much. That's one. But the issue for me is, how do you get the city to do the purchase? And we all go to Green Market. We all have CSAs. We have an $8 program for seniors for purchasing fresh fruits and vegetables in Manhattan. But how do you get the city of New York, with its huge purchase power, only second to the United States military? So how do you get us to do that? So that's one example for me of operational Green Deal. Another one is just, thank goodness for the state and the city on the green bags, on the plastic bags. All of you did such a great job, and that's a big deal. It's going to be an even bigger deal when it's implemented. And of course, you will all get a brewer bag tonight that you can recycle, but I know you already have lots of recycling bags, but you have one more. The other issue for us is, I want to thank the folks at Pratt. You mentioned them. This is, of course, the amazing industry in Staten Island that then takes all of our recyclable paper and makes it into pizza boxes. And they have one that says New York City on it in terms of pizza. But that is, first of all, it's a wonderful company, employing locally, understanding. We recently went to 59th Street, saw the paper go into the barges, and then, of course, we've all been to the plant several times. And as you may know, we have a competition in Manhattan with all the community boards to try to get them to compete against themselves and increase their recycling of paper. And then they get big financial assistance for groups in their area if they are successful. So I'm really excited about this. It's a year-long program. It starts July 1st. So anybody who lives in Manhattan, please participate and get your neighbors, because I think it'll really have effect in terms of what we make sure gets used correctly. So the Manhattan Paper Challenge is very exciting. I also just want to mention this, we have so many efforts that we're trying to deal with. I think the other one that I want to mention is, how do you just use this as an opportunity with the New York City Housing Authority? And that's a big nut to crack. We are very, very supportive. The residents would like to recycle, and goodness knows there are a lot of issues that NYCHA has. But as you talk about these issues, what operationally can Sanitation, Department of Health, NYCHA, residents, and so on do to make sure that their chutes are a challenge, the fact that they don't have a lot of support in terms of maintenance is a challenge, and just the education is a challenge. So those are the issues on every single recycling and an environment in the city of New York. The two ways to tackle it are the Department of Education and New York City Housing Authority. Those two are the big ones. They're bigger than most of the cities in the United States, and those are the two that we need to work on, and that would be an operational challenge. So I am absolutely in awe. I want to thank not only all the members of the SWAB for doing this. I did say, when I heard about the Green Deal nationally, I said, Jackie, we have to do it here, and you have done more. But I want to thank not only the SWAB, but also Alden Bonilla and Hallie Chu from our office, and Brian Lafferty, because you also done a great job. So, to all the SWAB members who've done this incredible work, to all the volunteers who came to set up, and to the wonderful moderator and panelists, and to everyone for working and coming tonight, thank you very much.
I think Gail said it all. Thank you all for coming tonight. Wear your helmets, ride your bikes, and we hope to see you again in the fall. Good night, everyone.